Good afternoon. Welcome to Global Conversations, Round 3, the view from 30,000 feet. We are so excited to include my research director, Isabel Vale. We're interviewing Melanie Doerner, who has done some extraordinarily important research on the viability of regional ballets in the United States, looking at who's succeeding, who's surviving, and who's thriving. And the importance of this is that her research concluded in February, right before everything shuts down. So Melanie is an arts leader. She's an arts academic, currently serves as development director at North Carolina Theater based in Raleigh. So Melanie, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Melanie, I'll jump right in with the first question. Let's tell our audience about how you got started in research. Obviously, your background is as an arts administrator. So tell us how you're involved in ballet, how you developed this research question, and then from there jumped into talking to these regional companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely, I would say I'm an arts leader and arts administrator first before researcher. And really how I came into working in arts management was recognizing that artists had really all the training, talent, sacrifice, genius, everything they needed. And often what was only standing in their way to realize their full artistic potential was resources. So what I thought to myself was, well, that's easy, it's just money. Now how you access that is actually very hard. And so for the last 20 years, that's what I've really been focused on, is garnering the resources that artists and arts organizations need to achieve their potential and their mission. And resources, a lot of that is money, but it's also more than money. It's people, policy, venues, things that money can influence, but there's other factors there. And so I've been looking at that and looking at interest in business habits and practices of arts organizations and ballet companies and regional ballet companies. And I just had a lot of questions about who's doing what and how they're doing it and what their business habits and practices are, with a belief not that there is a single way to do something or that there is a single model, but that there are best practices and there are models for success. And as I had questions, I couldn't always find the answers to those questions. And I thought, you know, I'm just gonna research that for myself. And a part of me just wanted to know, what is everybody doing? And what I really wanted to focus on was regional ballet companies. It's what I know and it's what I love. I'm the arts administrator. My husband is a ballet dancer, and he danced with the National Ballet of Canada, Alberta Ballet, and Ballet San Jose. And I grew up in Canada, lived in San Jose, California for 9 years, and have been here in Raleigh, North Carolina for the last 10. So for us, region was very big. It was all of the US and Canada. And so you sort of start with what you know, Canadian companies and American companies, and a large region, and focusing on regional companies. And what I defined by that for my study was really companies outside the mega dance cities, so outside of New York and San Francisco for the most part, and that did not have budgets of the size of a New York City Ballet, American Ballet Theater, or San Francisco Ballet, or some of the larger companies, because the idea of what was going to be important to Carolina Ballet or Charlotte Ballet was going to be comparative data and comparison information to companies of their size and of their regions. And so of this sort of curiosity of what is everyone doing and where can I just find all that information, that put me on this study to study the business habits and practices of 33 regional companies, ballet companies in the US and Canada. And Liza and Dance Data Project have been great, and you as well as share your research along the way and to help advise and be inform some of the study. And I wrapped it up in February, excited to share with the world everything that I had learned. And of course, as we know, the bottom just fell out for many industries, but the performing arts and live events in particular. And what I found myself then holding in my hands was I had just studied all of these companies right up to the brink of that moment and put all of this information together. And I had the chance to hear Joe Hodge, who's the artistic director of Guthrie Theater, say recently that how you navigate this crisis is how you entered this crisis. And I feel like I just captured the information as to how everyone had entered it. And so that's kind of where I got to in my research.
That's fascinating. And for our audience, I will tell you the title of this study. I'm going to glance down because it's a long title. Study of the Business Habits and Practices for Regional Ballet Companies in the US and Canada. So a really interesting scope, looking at these companies that influence communities throughout North America. And I think that it's super important research, and we were so happy to connect and be involved on the smallest scale with the beginnings of your research. So another question I have is regarding the key findings. So the successful ballet companies, your study found those have a healthy balance of contributed and earned incomes. There's this healthy range of buyers and believers. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about that? Because I think that this is something that Liza and I have discussed over and over, but there's never been anything tangible to kind of support that 60-40, 60-30 claim.
Yeah, and so it's the idea of you want to have this diversification or this good balance of your income. So you want a healthy mix of earned and contributed. And part of why you want to have that is, this is a performing art form. So you want there to be an audience, and you want people to value it enough that they're going to reach in their pocket and pay for a ticket like they do for their other entertainment and other things that they value, because you don't want an empty house. So you need to have enough people who want to buy your product and be there to participate, because it is this exchange of performer to audience. So you need enough people to care about what you do that they're willing to buy it. But of course, the tickets don't cover all of the costs. This is a labor-intensive art form of world-class talent, and that it's very expensive, and the costs increase. And it's hard to find certain economies like you can for other industries. And so you have to so the tickets aren't going to cover the full cost. Great art is really expensive. And so what you need is a healthy mix of believers, people who are going to invest in your beloved art form because they love it too, and they see the great value of it, and they see the impact on the audience. And so what you want to have is a mix of your contributed, your believers, and a mix of your earned income, your buyers who are buying their product. And you don't want to overtip the scale too much, because if you have a whole bunch of, if you have a small group but invest in you mightily, then you have a very small audience. But if you have everyone who's only willing to pay for a ticket, it's just never going to really, pay for the full cost of what you're doing, or that next investment. Or what if your work is not quite as popular? How do you still invest in that if you don't quite have an audience? Now, this becomes really important in this moment when you, in fact, have no earned income. So there are no ticket buyers. You do not have anyone buying your product because you're on a government shutdown and your venues are closed, and your unions may have said your artists cannot work. So you cannot deliver the product that people have already bought, or you cannot deliver a product for which they could buy. Then in this moment, you are wholly relying on your contributed income. So if you had an over-reliance on earned, what did that mean for you? In good days and popular shows and performances, you can make hay, but in this moment, it also reveals itself that that balance becomes important, because you don't know how you're going to need to lean on it. And contributed income, of course, is the order of the day, whereas donations are what are sustaining companies right now.
I'm fascinated because as you're talking about the popular shows, I'm thinking of the cancellation of the Nutcrackers that we've been seeing across the board and what that means. So before we decided to start recording, we were talking a little bit about data arts at SMU and Dr. Zanny Voss's work, and you were making a contrast between their methodology and yours and how the two work well together. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So Data Arts is so great in their research, and they are giving incredibly thoughtful and deeply important benchmarking data that is really looking at the details and that the companies have given them. So through Cultural Data Project, organizations have done their self-reporting at a lot of dimensions and levels that, frankly, just information you can find publicly in tax returns or on their website that don't have context, that has all been compiled by Data Arts. So they have this rich data source for which they can draw very rich findings. And they have great benchmarking data. So how much working capital do you need, what their fundraising index and information around fundraising ROI. So this is really important information for institutions as they're thinking about where they are in respect to that. One of the challenges with that data as an arts leader making decisions is it's all aggregate. And so there is just sort of this human nature of you want to compare yourselves, and you want to compare yourselves with who you consider your peers or who you aspire to be, or frankly, who you might think you're a little further ahead on. It's human nature to do those comparisons, and it is part of how we do our decision making. So the big goal for my study, while I was looking at research, it was so that it would analyze data so that we could derive some insights as to what were factors of success that could inform decision making, because arts leaders are making very difficult decisions every day about how to spend their very limited resources, and that is true today so true today. And while you have great aggregate data with SMU Data Arts, this desire of what is everyone doing was what I was really looking at. And so part of my study was just together to just show regional ballet companies of a certain budget size, $2 to $12 million, what they all look like, and what I chose 6 for a case study to share some key findings of commonalities, and then to look across the field, but that you can pluck your own company out and see where that measures up. And then you can look at the data arts benchmarking to see how you measure up to that as an aggregate in the field, but how you can parcel out companies that you want to look at specifically. And what has been very interesting in this moment of a pandemic and this feeling of we're all in this storm together is this great collegiate environment of everyone coming together. Producing arts organizations tend to be very head down and getting their show up. And so you tend to be a little bit very looking at your own work because you're so focused on producing your own work. When all of that stopped, and in a way that no one had encountered, everyone started looking to each other. What are you all doing? So the town halls and the collective conversations. So this desire of what are you doing and where are your successes and how are you making decisions, and the great collegiate environment of that and how that is all being shared has been really important. And I know SMU Data Arts, working with TRG Arts Consulting, released a great paper of in the long haul, what arts and cultural institutions need to be doing right now to adapt and innovate. And being able to share all this information among all these arts organizations at this time has, I think, been one of the great success stories of this collective endeavor. And I think that's really exciting for the field.
So I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll turn it back to Isabel. So give us a snapshot from your case studies of best practices or benchmarks then in February, and then what you're seeing in terms of coping mechanisms and people navigating well now.
Yeah, and I think there is, the reality is we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. And so how you navigate this crisis can depend on how you entered it. And so looking at what some of those, having that data of what it looked like just before this happened is interesting. And what were some of those key findings that I found in my study? They included things like the earned and contributed ratio, having that strong balance. The successful companies I looked at had that very strongly. One of the things that was revealed that I found was very interesting was salary. 50% of expense was on salary. And so that was very interesting and unexpected. Until I put all the numbers in the spreadsheet, I didn't know that's what was going to come up, that was a commonality that was shared among the 6 successful companies in my case study, that 50% of their expense was on salary. So one of the things I'm very interested in following is, what did that mean right now? So did they maintain their company of artists? And those are huge payroll expenses. And what did that look like? Or did they release their artists and say, we'll see you when we can mount our season next? If that is your huge expense, how did you manage that in this moment? And what different choices did different companies make? Another finding was most were unionized. And so in a moment of, our artists are a very vulnerable population at risk of being exploited. There's a reason why they're protected by unions. What is the role of unions playing right now? Our beloved art form is a dangerous activity in this moment with this virus. How are unions protecting them? And what does that look like? But how are they allowing them to work? And what does that look like? And how will that be different for companies that had unions and companies that didn't, about what they're able to do? I also found that the companies I looked at had artistic directors that had long tenures, and tenure really meant 10 to 20 years. And so what I had been thinking of when I was looking at that is sort of thinking about leadership transition. If you're going to be having a new artistic director in your company, for boards and leaders to know, they're really coming in for 10 and 20 years. So really be thinking about that in your hiring process, and you're really talking about a 10-year endeavor. What I'm really thinking about now is what that means. If you've had artistic directors for 10 and 20 years, how they're trying to save the companies they built. That is a certain exercise that is going to be exhausting. And at the end of saving those companies, what will be their level of energy and enthusiasm to rebuild those companies? Those are very different exercises. Do you have the enthusiasm to rebuild is not the same as saving, and how tired are you? And so will there be turnover in the field? Will there be an opportunity for new voices and new leadership with new enthusiasm that will come with that?
I was really struck by that, finding the kind of tenure of artistic directors, though it's not very surprising because in my own research of the ballet field, you see the same names going back on tax returns year after year after year, particularly for the men. We find at DDP, men get into that position after their careers as dancers, and then they just kind of hold that power until they decide that they can hand it over to someone else. And then, of course, one of the big issues is when they do pass the baton, is it going to go to a woman? Are they going to consider women of color? You know, there are just so many people excluded from leadership in ballet and the important conversations that are going to determine the future of the art form.
To say that there's this, change is hard, right? And what I know that DDP is advocating is change in the field, and change is very hard. We are at this moment of huge disruption, and there is an appetite for change in that moment that we haven't had before and may not have again in quite the same way. How will companies and we as a field capitalize on what that moment can offer us? There's elements of that huge disruption that, of course, equal parts terrifying and equal parts inspiring, but it is a moment like no other in that regard.
Yeah, and it's a moment of self-reflection, and I think that it'll be interesting to see the companies that do come out of this successful, and to also look at their leadership and see if maybe those are the companies that have been more equitable, not only in their artistic and executive directorship, but also within the ranks of the company, their administration. There are so many things that you could look at. But I will ask one more question, and it's mostly for our viewers. So this research, this is a really important tool that companies can use to kind of look at the framework of a successful company, compare themselves to the ones that are in theory successful, and adapt their working model to become a better company, more relevant, more successful, financially stable, et cetera, in the future. So where can companies and leaders and people who are interested in the dance world find your research and read it?
That is a great question. And I know Dance Data Project has been a great partner to me in this research, and I know I'll send you a copy, and please make it available to your followers and readers, and anyone who's interested is welcome to email me directly. What I'm really interested in looking at is sort of that what next moment. And so my first, in February, I was all set to just publish this research and to send it out to all the publications. And 30 days later, it was clear that this research was frozen in time and everything was going to change. And so as a researcher, I hate that we're going to see some of these things come to life in real time, but it will be so telling. And the information we learn from this will be so important as to what are not just norms in the field and just things that we have done, but they're really going to reveal what are some of the factors for success. And I don't believe there will be an answer. I think there will be several great examples and great models, but it will be so telling in a way that we haven't had before, and that can be such a guiding force for us going forward. And of course, I think you'll share my contact information and things at the end of the video, but I encourage anyone to email me directly. I've shared the study with all the regional companies that I studied directly, because they were really my target audience as to, I hope this helps you in this moment of decision making. These are not the answers for you, but this is information to inform how you're going to make some really tough decisions.
We have part 1 and we will be awaiting part 2. I am interested though, because several of the folks that we've interviewed for Global Conversations number 3 have defined success other than just your budget growing or putting on a new show, a big world premiere. They also talk about the culture of the company and encouraging new voices and how you treat your employees. And I think you touched on that with the unions. I mean, obviously, I would imagine part of success is, do you have a happy band of artists who want to stay with the company and enjoy coming to work every day? And that would be, I would imagine, quite hard to research. I'd love you to talk about some of the, quote, soft factors, although they're not that soft.
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely is. Financial and artistic success are in tandem, and you don't have one without the other. And the reality is there's no point in having financial success is not the outcome. If you are a mission-based arts organization, artistic success and community benefit is your mission. Financial success is your ability to deliver on that mission. And so that being said, my study really focused on the business side, in part because that's my area of focus as an arts leader, is on the business side, but also the reality for some of the comparative data. I was looking at business practices, but a lot of the readily available, easy to compare data is financial. Those are the easy things to measure. But how you measure what artistic success can look like is much harder. And like you said, it's those soft things. One of the things I came across in my research was some very interesting research coming out of Australia and England, and with something called culture counts. And they were really attempting to create a measurement framework of what artistic success or artistic quality could look like. And I found it fascinating because they created these 12 dimensions, and they really were the things that are going through my mind when I'm seeing a performance or enjoying a performance, but I don't know if I would articulate them quite like this, but I include them in my study. But there were things like concept. Was it an interesting idea? Distinctiveness. Was it different from things you've experienced before? Local impact. Is it important that it's happening right here? Relevance. Does it have something to say about the world in which we live in? Originality. Was it groundbreaking? Risks. The artists were really challenging themselves. These are just a handful of the 12 dimensions. But as I read them, I said, this is really the process I go through. I just do it in 2 hours and not knowing, and I do it over a glass of wine conversation before or after when I talk about it. But there is a way that you measure it, and they came up with a way to do that in an objective fashion. I think organizations shy away from that, but it's a mistake, I think, to do so sometimes, because art for art's sake can be not as compelling. And I think when we talk about the advocacy that's needed and how are the arts being valued, everyone knows we're missing it, and everyone knows it's valuable, but it can be hard to advocate for it if we don't have the language and we don't talk about it in a way that people can understand in some of those contexts that invite investment.
I would actually like to include that study as well in a link, but for our viewers, we will of course have the link to contact Melanie or to access the study directly so that you can read it. It will be in the description box on our website and in a link in bio for those who are watching from IGTV. Melanie, thank you so much for your time, for digging into those key findings. And I think that this has given our viewers a really interesting bit of information to consider, whether they be leaders of ballet companies, dancers, anyone out there who loves ballet. But we really appreciate your time, and we'll stay tuned for the follow-up post-pandemic, because I think there's a lot to be explored from here on out.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.